Mr. Trump, would you consider Russia as a security threat? Thank you.
Well, I consider many countries as a security threat, unfortunately, when you look at what's going on in the world today.
He actually got asked that question a second time and had a very similar answer moments later. Despite the president's continued reluctance to single out Russia as a threat to the United States, today more diplomatic shots were fired over the Kremlin's interference in the U.S. election. The State Department is forcing Russia to shut down its consulate in San Francisco and scale back staff at annexes in Washington and New York. The move is in retaliation for Vladimir Putin's order last month to have the U.S. cut 755 diplomatic personnel from Russia. But as the New York Times reports tonight, quote, the State Department's response seemed calculated to avoid deepening the rift with Russia. The administration is not expelling any Russian diplomatic personnel from the United States, nor did it touch the staff at Russia's main embassy in Washington. Joining me now, Robert Costa, national political reporter for The Washington Post, Vivian Salama, incoming NBC News national political reporter, and here in studio is Associated Press White House reporter Jonathan Lemire. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being with us. Vivian, let me start with you. In August, earlier this month, the president said this about the Russian decision to cut those 755 U.S. staff members in Russia. Let's listen.
I want to thank him because we're trying to cut down on payroll. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm very thankful that he let go of a large number of people because now we have a smaller payroll. There's no real reason for them to go back.
Vivian, there's a journalistic term for that. I think it might be weird. That was just a strange response that the president had to another country ordering 755 staffers to not do their work.
The president has always seemed to do this tap dance when it comes to Russia, whether it has to do with the Russia investigation, whether it has to do with diplomatic relations with Russia. He's never outwardly accused Russia. He's never outwardly embraced the advice of the intelligence community here in the country that feel very confident that Russia was behind the hacking of the U.S. election in 2016. He says that it was maybe Russia, but also probably other players involved. And so the diplomatic rift that we've seen kind of manifesting itself over the course of this administration's time in office has been really fascinating because it really hasn't been coming from the White House. A lot of it has been coming from the other members of administration, whether the State Department, the UN, Ambassador Nikki Haley. They're the ones who have really gone after Russia and tried to take the tougher stance while the president distances himself, not really touching the hacking thing except for shortly after his first meeting with President Putin of Russia. And so it's really fascinating to see all of this going on with the backdrop of the investigation taking place where the president kind of gives a little bit of leeway to Russia, not wanting to get involved, but still insisting that he had no collusion in it. A lot of people obviously concerned about this. They say, well, if he didn't collude, if nobody in his campaign colludes, if he's absolutely confident about it, then why doesn't he just come out and take a tougher stance on it? And that's what we saw with that clip, is that he doesn't quite do that. He always falls short of that. And that raises so many questions where a lot of people say, well, is there something he's trying to hide? What is the issue with the president just not, taking a strong stance?
That is the question. Jonathan, let me just ask you, to Vivian's point, he's getting advice from somebody he had to do something, right? At this point, there had to be a response to the 755 American staffers. This is a small portion of that. It's a very measured, very small response to it. But to whose pressure did he bow on this? Is this Rex Tillerson? Is it the State Department? What's going on?
Certainly the state has suggested that some sort of response was necessary. But the president, to Vivian's point, has never quite gone there. I was actually part of the press pool, the small group of reporters that traveled with the president when he made those comments in Bedminster last week, saying that he was happy that the the staff was gone, that we wouldn't have to shrink the payroll and so on. And later, Sarah Sanders suggested, the press secretary suggested, that he was kidding. No one in the room really thought that. Like, it was an odd response. And what we know about this president is this, that when he feels pressure to do something, he often goes the other way. He does not like the idea of being managed. We're seeing that in the White House now with the new chief of staff. All these storylines about John Kelly getting the White House, the West Wing staff in line, but yet seems to have no control over the president himself. In fact, In recent weeks, it feels like the president's Twitter feed has become more and more lively, more and more antagonistic, as if to prove a point that he can't be controlled by the chief of staff. And when it comes to Russia in particular, he seems to lash out, particularly when there are developments in the investigation that seem to be coming close to home.
Robert, to Vivian's point that he's getting guidance from someone, and to Jonathan Lemire's point that he chafes at the control, you had a byline on a story published in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, I'm sorry, unless something's changed since last I read it, where it says, Donald Trump resists being handled, says Roger Stone, a former Trump advisor and longtime confidant. No one tells him who to see, who to listen to, what to read, what he can say, Stone added. General Kelly is trying to treat the president like a mushroom, keeping him in the dark and feeding him expletive. It's not going to work. Donald Trump is a free spirit.
We're seeing these generals around the president, General Kelly as chief of staff, General Mattis at the Pentagon, really trying to, and of course General McMaster, National Security Advisor, influence the way the president thinks through some of these foreign policy challenges, and that includes Russia. And they adopt more of the traditional foreign policy view in the Republican Party and even in the Democratic Party when it comes to this hawkish position towards Russia. So you see in this administration a balancing of that traditional hawkish view with the instincts of the president and perhaps the Secretary of State Tillerson when it comes to having a bit of a softer touch with Russia. All of these forces are combined in how the United States is responding to these types of questions.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.